Do you have any comment about the judge telling you you crossed the line by calling the prosecutors, in this case, a six-pack of white women on the last TMZ podcast? Welcome to the Two Angry Men podcast, and welcome, Your Honor. I'm Harvey Levin.
Oh my goodness! And I'm Mark Geragos. And before you go there, we talk about the fact that the Pope is just slightly older than me. But
Okay. No, we can't talk.
But he's younger. But he's younger than Harvey. So think about that for a second.
Oh my God! I know my law school roommate texted me because he's in Chicago, and he said that. He said, "I can't believe I'm older than the Pope." Oh, full circle, man.
Wait, what are you talking about? Welcome, Your Honor, because I'm wearing black? Or
no, I'm saying welcome, Your Honor, because as you know, the judge in the Diddy trial has said he is going to be listening assiduously to the Two Angry Men podcast to see if you are up to any more shenanigans.
Well, I would call, let's kind of zoom out for a second.
Okay. I'm going to zoom back in eventually, right?
Yeah, I know, but by then we'll be on a Menendez.
Flood the zone.
Yeah, so exactly, flood the zone. So for many years, I think even when you started your career as a lawyer back in the day, and I'm old enough to remember when there was great kind of pushback, if you will, to lawyers not just speaking but advertising. Yep. And the whole idea.
It was against the rules in California. You could be disbarred for it.
Yeah, I mean, there was, when you started practicing, when I started practicing, it was still verboten the idea of Morgan and Morgan or Jacoby and Myers.
Listen, it's way beyond that. I, as a young man, I had a radio show where I gave legal advice and kind of general things people would call in on a talk radio show. And somebody filed a disciplinary complaint against me with the state bar, saying I was not allowed to do that. And the state bar back then took it seriously enough that they contacted me and they suggested I shouldn't do it. And I remember saying, bring it on, file charges against me because I will fight this one. It's unconstitutional. And they backed off. But there was a really draconian rule. So, by the way, we got to talk. People don't know what we're talking about. Can I just say, you got in trouble for something you said on the Two Angry Men podcast last week. You called prosecutors in the case a six-pack of white women, and the judge excoriated you for that. Care to talk?
No, I'm going to give you a little bit of background.
Okay.
So I believe it was in the 1990s, there was a lawyer, very accomplished criminal defense lawyer named Gentile. And the prosecutors in that case in Nevada had was where I'm sitting right now, which is why I thought about it this morning. They had done a press conference, and Mr. Gentile, who was defending the defendant who the press conference was directed at, had responded in kind and had pushed back on the prosecution, so to speak.
They had a trial.
Fast forward, and a trial, he won.
Gentile's client was found not guilty, and the state bar went after him for speaking publicly. Very famous case.
For his case, and tried to impose discipline on him.
Right.
That case made it to the U.S. Supreme Court. Gentile versus State Bar of Nevada decided, I want to say 1997. So you and I had been practicing for quite a while at that point, but that was still, you had come from the era where you couldn't say a word, you were muzzled completely, to where it evolved into, look, you're supposed to zealously defend your client. And the idea that the prosecution, this has always been one of my kind of beefs with gag orders, and I'll get into this in a second. The idea that the prosecution can come in and everybody in their mind on every high profile case, even low profile cases, the prosecution comes out, they do a a staged press conference. And if it's federal, they've got all the agencies standing next to them. They usually have a table with the evidence. They've got guns laid out. They've got all kinds of other stuff. Or they do Rudy Giuliani, speaking of the Southern District, used to do perp walks, pulling, guys who were charged with inside trading off the floor. Famously, 1990, whatever, the year before Susan McDougal, when she wouldn't testify against Bill Clinton, they perp walked her in a miniskirt.
Okay, come on.
Right.
We got to short circuit this. So the bottom line here is the U.S. Supreme Court, not just in that case, there's another case called Shepard versus Maxwell. But the bottom line is the Supreme Court has been sympathetic to lawyers and said, look, especially defense lawyers, you have a constitutional right to defend your client. On the other hand, when prosecutors go out and allegedly pollute the jury pool, the defense has to have a right to go out and speak as well, because the only people guaranteed the right to a fair trial, not prosecutors, defendants. And that's what the Supreme Court said. So fast forward to Diddy, that there was a press conference.
But wait, before you get to
come
Diddy,
on, people don't want to be, you're not a law professor.
Yeah,
come on.
They do. You'd be surprised.
I know, I would be surprised. I think people want to hear about what you said about a six-pack of white women.
But I'm not going to go there
okay,
anymore.
But hold on. You can't deflect. You can't deflect by being a professor.
Why is that deflection? I want to talk about.
Okay, we get the law.
We
get the law. But here's I got to ask you a couple of questions. The judge said that he was going to listen to, because I've seen the transcript. We got a copy of the transcript. So the judge said, you do it one more time, Geragos. And essentially he said the prosecution is going to ask to cite you for contempt, and it sounded like he'd be sympathetic. So that's the way I read it. And then he said, I'm going to be listening to the podcast. So two things. One is, I'm wondering how you feel about the whole six-pack of white women. Second thing is, it seems like the judge is excluding you from the gag order because he said he's going to be listening to the podcast as opposed to saying to you, you can't be on it.
Well, I don't think, that's another misnomer. There isn't, to my understanding, a gag order. What's being invoked here by the
prejudicial publicity, same thing.
Yeah, no, it's different.
There's
a qualitative difference. And I know you don't want to hear the history of it.
Oh,
but,
God, no. I swear, I'm like the last thing I want to hear.
I know, but you're a California lawyer. California used to have a rule in the days.
Mark.
That rule was already said didn't stand muster because it didn't have a safe harbor. You can't, as a defense lawyer, be restrained from responding to various things that are put out there by the prosecution.
Got it. Okay, Mark.
You don't seem to want to
at all,
address the first
because I know what you're doing.
At all.
Mark, I just want to ask
Harvey,
any comment.
Harvey, I have a question.
No.
No.
Come on, Mark.
Harvey.
Mark, everybody wants to hear you. Everybody.
Mark. Harvey. Look, there is a pervasive view that just because you're on TMZ and you are my podcast partner, that somehow I'm affiliated with TMZ, right?
Well, we don't have, but the judge doesn't have a beef with me. The judge has a beef with you.
Yeah.
So don't drag us into it. It's the judge was talking to you, Mark. I mean, it's just simply, well, no, but you're just deflecting. Do you okay, I'll just do it. You can say whatever you want. Do you have any comment about the judge telling you crossed the line by calling the prosecutors, in this case, a six-pack of white women on the last TMZ podcast?
Well, no, what I would like to do is I would like to talk about the background of.
Oh God, I don't want to hear the background. Mark, do you have a comment about it? If you say no, okay.
I don't.
Okay.
I don't have.
That's fair.
But
so
why,
because
but wait
so hold on.
I'm not being interviewed here.
No,
this is a give and take.
I'm being.
This is too angry. This is too angry man. This is one angry man asking questions.
I'm being respectful. If you don't want to say yes or no, that's fine. If you want to say you don't have a comment, I get it. I get it. But can I ask you? Can I ask you one other question, please?
Only if I can ask you one after.
Okay, fair.
Yes.
So
okay,
it's interesting to me that the judge called you into chambers in the first place, because typically the judge only does that with attorneys involved in the case. And you have not made it clear whether you are or are not an attorney in the case. So let me just make my point. So you have been in the courtroom all week wearing a rumpled suit, I might add, on Monday, and it wasn't any better Wednesday. Tuesday was okay. You have been consulting with the lawyers who are at counsel table. You have passed notes back and forth to the various lawyers. You have interacted with Diddy. You went into chambers with Mark Agnifilo, who is the lead lawyer. And when you came out of chambers, he had his arm around you. You have been in the 8th floor cafeteria, I know, Mark, because our producer, Brian, saw you there with your daughter, Tenny, who is on the defense team, and the other lawyers at a table drinking bottled water, and you were talking to them about the case during the lunch break. So exactly why is it that the judge called you into chambers? Seems to me the judge views you as part of the defense team.
Is that a statement? Or are you making a
It's both.
closing argument?
It's actual, well,
Oh,
it's
okay.
not bad,
So
you got to say.
as you know, yeah, it wasn't bad, but there were a lot of false assumptions there, but I don't think I have let it be a secret that in fact, if you Google, you will see on several occasions I have represented Sean. I have frequently talked with Sean. I consider Sean a friend, and just because he's facing a very, very serious charges, I'm not going to abandon Sean. In fact, some would say I've given him my firstborn. So that is an interesting thing. But a number of the things you said, I just won't even engage with. What I will say is that if you would let me finish, there is a larger issue here, which this is not an interview as much as it is a podcast, and I want to talk about the larger issue.
Ugh.
And the larger issue
But
is
you're just ignoring my.
the whole idea. Just hold on. I let you give.
Okay,
I let you
but you
give
didn't
a
respond to it.
spiel.
You didn't respond to it.
Yeah, because there's the response is kind of a TMZ response. I'd like to widen it just a little bit. And the widening it is that historically, and you mentioned Shepard versus Maxwell, who, for those who aren't in the weeds, that was the case in the 50s that F. Lee Bailey made his bones on. It was what became, do you remember the TV show?
The
Fugitive.
The Fugitive.
Correct.
With David Jansen.
Right. With David Jansen. Very good. And by the way, how about the movie?
Great movie. Harrison Ford.
Very good. Look at you. And what the Supreme Court said is the carnival-like, the circus-like atmosphere affected the defendant's right to a fair trial. They weren't worried about the government's right. The U.S. Supreme Court wasn't.
I said this
somehow that had, well, you certainly were rat-a-tat-tatting it, but somehow that has been turned on its head. That the Supreme Court was arguing for the government's right to a fair trial, which is laughable.
So hold on. Okay, so I can bring this back.
Wait,
no, I get it. We get the case. We got it, Mark. You just gave us the facts and the holding of the case. So now the question is this: when the judge said this, was the judge saying the judge wasn't saying you violated the gag order. The judge was just saying, under the rules of professional conduct, you can't go after prosecutors this way. So I don't think the judge was gagging you.
I don't. First of all, I don't think it was a gag order. I don't think that we're talking about.
I agreed with you on that.
Professional conduct. I don't think we're talking about anything more than a local rule, which is 23.1, which, if you take a look at the rule, it has not been interpreted.
So, okay, there's a local rule. You dispute the local rule. So I'm obviously you're not going to talk about that, and it doesn't seem like you want to talk about your association with the case, although it's blurry to me because, again, you've been all over that case and you were in the courtroom all this past week. So I'm a little confused about why it is either you are or are not part of the defense team. And in a way, I'm kind of glad if you're saying you're not, because then you can be in the podcast.
Yes, the irony is, I don't know why you're arguing so forcefully for me to be on the defense team when that is at your own
I
peril.
just said that. I literally just said that.
Oh,
Okay, I want to get into the case for a second. I am baffled at something. So there are three alleged victims who are ex-girlfriends and one who's an ex-employee of Diddy. Um, Cassie, we know, is one of them, and I want to get into Cassie in a minute. But the fascinating one is there is one of these women does not want to testify, and our information is that she's never wanted to testify, and yet the prosecution added her to the indictment and planned on calling her, but said as recently as the last hearing this week that she's still unwilling. So I'm not sure I understand the play here. If they've got somebody, but they can't get that person on the stand, why they added her to this indictment and what it means.
well, I'm not so sure that we will know the answer to any of that until tomorrow, given what I heard in the courtroom. I think that the prosecutor said that they were going to address the issue. We're taping this on Thursday. If you're watching this, I believe they said they were going to address it on Friday.
So, if she is unwilling to testify, what, they would drop her from the indictment?
It's an interesting issue as to somebody who is alleged to be a victim in sexual assault cases. I don't know that they've addressed this issue head on in this circuit where they are, but I know in other courts there's been legislation that you cannot compel. There was a case where somebody refused to testify in California, for instance, in a prosecution for a sex offense, refused to testify, was placed in custody, and then they did a expedited hearing on it and was released. But then the legislature did a carve out on that. So it would seem to cut against the idea of forcing somebody who was unwilling to testify about these kinds of things.
Okay.
Also cuts across. It's an interesting dilemma if you're a prosecutor too. How hard do you want to go with somebody?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Cassie. We got some pictures of her that were shot yesterday, and she's in New York, and everything we know is she's going to testify next week, and she looks like she's about to give birth. I mean, she is very pregnant, and you know, image matters and optics matter in court, and all my information about what the defense is saying is that they're going to say Diddy is not a criminal. He is a swinger who led a swinger's lifestyle with his ex-girlfriends. And when you try and juxtapose Cassie the way she is right now with that image, that's going to be a difficult jump for the jury, I think.
Well, it is what it is. I mean, you've got, I think I saw, if I'm not mistaken, I think I saw the picture you're referring to. I don't know. You're saying that's within the last
It
day?
happened. The picture was taken yesterday by one of the photo agencies. She was just walking in New York, but
Oh, so it was not a
it,
TMZ,
no.
wasn't a TMZ
Oh,
stalker?
would you stop? We don't. Come on,
I
Mark.
mean, you talk about the guy in the
We
cafeteria.
we.
I'm more concerned
Well,
about
you
the
were in
guy
a
who was
public
following you.
cafeteria. He just didn't.
I
He
was in
didn't.
a private bathroom and the guy introduced himself as a TMZ stringer.
No, he told me about this. He said you guys were at the urinal together, and he said, "Hey, I'm Brian from TNC," and you said,
Exactly.
well, "Nice to meet you."
Yes, exactly. So,
That-
can I have a can I
he
can I have
had
a
to.
moment,
He had to
please?
pee. Apparently, give me a break. You didn't own the bathroom there, so
Yeah,
so no. So seriously,
I'm
this is.
seriously what? I don't, what are you going to do? What's your alternative if you're the defense? I mean, it
You don't really
is
have
what it.
one. You don't have one.
Yeah. What is your? I mean, It is what it is. I agree with you. Optics always matter. I mean, anything, I've always said jurors are very perceptive. Harvey, you talk about a rumpled suit. If you wear the same pair of shoes 2 days in a row, I've known jurors that would notice something as your shoes. They notice fashion. They
That's
notice whether.
I think you're so right. And by the way, kind of raises an issue here. So Diddy comes in a sweater, gray hair and glasses. He wore the same sweater 3 days in a row. So all of this stuff is calculated. So, because I remember with the Menendez brothers, it was almost like Miami Vice. I mean, there was another pastel every day, and he is wearing the same bleak sweater day after day after day.
Well,
Decode
sweaters.
Decode that.
Well, I remember one of I think he would have a sense of humor about this. I haven't talked to him in a while, but after Chris Brown's round of close encounters with the criminal justice system in LA, he did a Larry King show, and I appeared with him. I'll never forget walking into the green room, and somebody had put him in a baby blue sweater.
I remember this.
Bow tie. And I believe that I said at the time, why are we dressing him like Urkel? And it just made.
But he went on. Sense. He went on that way, and I remember we actually put that up on the website. I remember being kind of stunned by that too.
Yeah, it
makes a difference. I mean, it makes a difference.
Everything you do gets scrutinized. Everything you do, whether knowingly, unknowingly, consciously, or unconsciously, jurors are sitting there and they're like anybody else. They're watching the show, whether it's in a New York courtroom or an LA courtroom or places in between. Jurors are very attuned to what's happening in front of them, and that's why you have to, even though you're concentrated on the case, you have to concentrate, keep a focus on everything that's going on around you at the same time. I don't know that. I mean, what would you have somebody come in as?
See, I thought he was. I just thought he was going to wear a suit. I mean, I was kind of interested in why the defense team chose the sweater, the gray hair, the glasses. Maybe because it goes.
What are you going to do about the gray hair? I mean, don't get me started.
No, I get it. I get it.
Dyeing hair. Okay. Yeah.
Jesus, Mark. Okay. What was the point of the sweater?
I have no idea. Like I said, I very rarely will make fashion or give fashion input.
Actually, that's probably a wise move.
Yes, thank you.
So help me out on this. Help me out on this. I remember covering the O.J. Simpson case, and it was all people talked about. That's the only thing I talked about really for a couple of years, where people came up to me. It's the only thing they wanted to talk to me about. That was before social media, and that jury was sequestered. So now you've got what they say is an 8-week trial. I have a feeling it's going to go longer than that. And you got a jury that's not sequestered. They're going to be going home every night. And this will be all over social media. People are going to be giving opinions about the testimony. And, somebody, even if they don't look for it, which I think a lot of them are going to because it's just human nature to see what people think of the trial, even though they're told not to, you open your Facebook page and boom, it's there. It's on your feed. So I don't see how this jury doesn't get polluted. I don't see it in 2025.
So one of the things and you hit on, maybe because I think we discussed this before, OJ was before this explosion of social media. However, if you remember, because you covered it, and I variously was on the Hall during that time in other cases, but it was wall-to-wall coverage because many of the TV stations went gavel to gavel, right, as you'll remember. So people were watching that. Yeah, yours as well. Back in the old days of, what was that, KCAL?
Channel 2.
Yeah. That was before CBS. KCAL bought Channel 2 or vice versa.
Yeah.
But you'll remember that started obviously with the Bronco chase, and it started with that kind of live coverage. I'll remember the Bronco chase kind of breaking into TV shows.
It broke into the NBA championship, and it overtook it.
Yeah, in ratings. at the time.
Well, no, they
Now,
dumped out of the championship. Well, they put the championship in a small box, and then they put OJ in a big box.
right, and the ratings still skyrocketed. It wasn't
Right.
like the Heidi NFL football.
Okay, so how do you
But-
avoid it
So
today?
that was back in the day when linear TV was in its heyday. That's no longer the case. And the part of the problem is now that you will get people reporting from inside of a courtroom on a trial that is not televised because it's in federal district court, and they're going to be getting their information filtered through social media.
Well, except
And
let me jump in though. I think it's more
Okay.
than just getting information, because if you look, for example, at the Johnny Depp trial and Amber Heard, in that case, TikTok dominated the coverage. Everybody was looking at TikTok. It wasn't opinions. Rather, it wasn't information. It was opinions. Everybody was giving their opinion. So it wasn't Amber Heard testified so-and-so about such and such. It was, she's lying. It was all opinion
But
driven.
they were taking clips, and everybody was dropping clips,
Right.
because it was
But
televised.
it was all
It's
opinion based.
It
was all
totally different.
opinion.
I agree.
So how does
there
this
is
not pollute the jury? Because you know they're going to look at this, right?
I think it does. I mean, I've said to you countless times, I think one of the biggest mistakes in Peterson was not going along with the prosecution, who did not want
To
cameras in
sequester the
court.
jury. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's a problem, because they get filtered information under the guise that it's being reported on objectively, which, as you and I both know, is never the case.
So then why wasn't the jury in this case sequestered? Why won't they be sequestered?
I think that when you're talking about an 8-week trial, I just think it's too tough hardship-wise to begin with, to find people who can serve. And then when you combine it with, are you going to be sequestered? Other than that joke I told you, which was actually true, where the judge told the juror, no, you're not going to be sequestered. And the juror said, oh, I was hoping I would be.
Get away.
Other than that, most people do not want to be sequestered.
No, I know that. I know that.
8 weeks.
But, and the other thing is, I remember in OJ, these jurors were dropping like flies because, they looked at something, they talked to somebody, and here you're going to have 6 alternates. But man, somebody comes in on Monday and says, so-and-so talked to me on Friday about the case, and they said this about, and, or a neighbor comes in and says, oh, that juror talked to me.
Well, on the upside, the OJ jury was very well fed. I remember, I knew many of the caterers who were doing it back then, and they were getting specific orders. They were getting food brought in. I mean, that jury enjoyed themselves, at least ostensibly, from the adventures in culinary excellence.
Okay. So final question.
Wait, I get to ask you a question.
Well, okay. Final question for me, and then you do.
Okay.
In the Charles Manson case, I did not cover it. I was too young to cover it, but I was conscious of it.
I was going to say you were old enough.
No, I was conscious of it.
Were you at Channel 9 at that point?
I was I was just entering college. So in the Charles Manson case, the jurors walked in the front door of the courthouse, the criminal courthouse. And there was a newsstand there, and there was a headline in the Los Angeles Times. And the headlines, I will never forget this. The headline said, Manson guilty, Nixon declares. And the jurors looked through the glass of the newsstand and saw the headline. The judge in that case almost declared a mistrial just because the jury saw that. So the question is, how much tolerance is this judge going to have given social media today, where jurors either intentionally or unavoidably see this stuff?
Let me tell you what the conundrum is as I see it. And what you just described was the judge back then in the 70s protecting the defendant's right to a fair trial. He wasn't worried about the government's right to a fair trial,
right,
because that was many years ago, before this guy got perverted. Now, what you have is an admonition to jurors, whether it's that jury, whether it's any other jury, that you're not supposed to, if you see something, you're not supposed to engage with it. You'll remember in that very courthouse when Sarah Palin was, before this last trial, her previous trial, there were jurors who were deliberating on her defamation trial who got breaking news alerts. And those breaking news alerts was that the judge had indicated he was going to dismiss the case. That is fascinating to me, that how do you deal with things that just pop up in social media?
Right.
How do you look away
Right.
if it's a headline, if
The
it's a photo
unavoidability
or
of it.
something like that? That's
Right.
a very, it's unavoidable. And at the same time, you have to assume that the jurors are following your orders. You're telling them you can't look at the media. If you see it, turn it off. If somebody's talking to you, avoid it.
Impossible.
And
It's
so
impossible.
you have
It's
to assume
impossible.
they're following orders.
But it's impossible. Not even that
Well,
they're
I
trying.
gave you the example.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
You said you have one more,
Yeah,
and then
I
we
gave
got
you
to
the
go.
example. It's a, we're gonna, well, so I do. I mentioned before, and I know you don't want to talk about it, but I'm going to come back to it. So you have this model where the tabloidization has been imported here in the last 30 years. We do that, and it's very similar to the UK, but you don't have what's called the Contempt of Court Act. And I know this would be against your own self-interest, but I'm going to ask you as a lawyer, don't you think in these supersized media, kind of what I call supersized cases, that there should be something like a Contempt of Court Act, where if you're not going to sequester the jurors, that you do something with the coverage of the case itself?
That is a total violation of the First Amendment. Not even close. That is ridiculous.
And
so you're going to have the
so
judge.
then I'm gonna
You're going
give
to
you-
have the judge tell the New York Times, tell us, tell everybody, here's what you can and cannot cover. No, that never.
So then I'm gonna ask you this.
Any configuration of the Supreme Court, I think, would say absolutely unconstitutional.
So then you would go, and that's what leads me to my last question. First Amendment always trumps the Sixth.
The words you learn in law school are First Amendments in a preferred position, and you know that.
Vis-a-vis the Sixth Amendment?
Vis-a-vis,
That's where I think
it's called
that should-
preferred position.
Yeah, I think the Sixth Amendment should trump the First Amendment.
Well, talk to Trump, and maybe he'll do that. But the First Amendment right now is in a preferred position.
Okay, so you as the first, and I'll be in the sixth.
Okay. By the way,
First person.
you are also on our new Tubi show, which will drop every Thursday night, where we talk about all the inside stuff that happened in the case. So check that out on Tubi for free. By the way, real quick.
By the way, how do you guys make money? How do you monetize it?
Well, how do you guys make money? What kind of question is that, first of all?
What
kind of question is that?
You're looking for
You don't
clicks?
ask
I'm
people.
just curious. How do you give it away for free?
Don't you know what polite society is? You don't ask questions like that.
Polite society is you don't ask Harvey his age. That's polite society.
How are you juggling this with Menendez? Because this is their big hearing.
Frequent flyer points.
Is there anything you want to say about the Menendez brothers? I mean, spell it.
I miss you.
Okay, I'll see you later.
Bye-bye.